Okay, all right. So these are going to be called benchmark fractions. These benchmark fractions are extremely important. They are so important that I want you to memorize these. There's no cutesy little, okay, do this and do that. It is straight up memorization. Just like if I wrote the number 2 on the board, you have memorized that that is number 2, right? All right, so that's the same thing. I want you to be able to look at a fraction, these particular fractions, and know without a doubt what that fraction is as a percent, as a decimal, and what it looks like on a strip diagram. That's the goal, right? And I would highly recommend that I start studying these benchmark fractions now, because there could be a possibility of a pop quiz at any point over these benchmark fractions at any time. A pop quiz, hint. All right, so the fractions that I consider are benchmark fractions, and so we're going to go through and we're going to write all the fractions. So we've got 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, 1/8, 1/10, 1, and then I'm going to write an additional one of 2/3. These are our benchmark fractions. Benchmark fractions. Okay, so we're gonna the reason why benchmark fractions are so important is because notice it's 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and so forth, right? Because if I know what 1 is, I can find out what any number is, right? If I said, okay, I know what 1/2 is, and I said, okay, well, what is 5/2? Well, if I know what 1/2 is, then I can find out what 2/2 is, and 3/2, and 4/2, right? Because all I'm going to be doing then is just continuing to add that, right? Okay, so 1/2, we start with a very basic fraction, okay? What is 1/2 as a percent? Yes, sir? 50%. And I know you haven't dealt with percents a whole lot, but after this unit, you're going to be dealing with percents all the time. All right, so I know when I see the benchmark fraction of 1/2, my brain should also see that the percent equivalency is 50%, right? If I see a sign when I go to the store to buy me some clothes and it says 1/2 off, I know that I'm getting 50% off, right? All right, what is that as a decimal? And I kind of try to think about it as money, because decimal to me, I see money. So tell me what 1/2 is as a decimal. Yes, sir.
1 in 50 hundredths, or is it?
No, think about money. If I have half of a dollar, how much money do I have? Yes, ma'am.
50 cents.
I have 50 cents. So how would I write 50 cents?
Wait.
0.5, right? All right. So that's how I would write. Or I could even do 0.50. Right? Because we know that ends and it's going to just be zeros after that. So my decimal, when I see the fraction of 1/2, I should automatically see in my brain 50% and 0.5. So now if I said, okay, what are 3/2? I can do 0.5 plus 0.5 plus 0.5, right? And I'm going to get what? 1.5, right? All right. And then what does it look like when I shade in? Well, that's easy enough. I'm going to shade in 1 out of the 2. All right, pretty easy. All right, 1/3. I'm going to star 1/3. I'm going to put 3 stars there. And the reason why I'm putting stars by 1/3 is because 1/3 is a unique fraction. When we talked about 1/2 and we changed it to a decimal, we said it was 0.5, right? If I were to divide it out, it would end at that 0.5. I wouldn't have to keep dividing it out, correct? That's called a terminating decimal. It terminates. It ends. 1/3 is unique because it's called a repeating decimal. It will go on forever and ever and ever and ever. And did I mention forever? Right? So it will never ever end. I will keep dividing it out and dividing it out and dividing it out, and I will keep going and going and going. Right? Like the road goes on forever and it never ends. All right, so that's called a repeating decimal. So let me first look at what the decimal is going to look like. It's going to be 0.33. That is what our decimal looks like. Now, if I were to leave off this little hat, or whatever you want to call that, if I left that off, that tells me that it's a terminating decimal. That means that it ends after this. But we said 1/3 goes on forever. So I have to be able to signify that 3 keeps going forever and ever, right? Without having to write 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So that line on top tells me whatever is underneath this is going to keep going. So if I said, hey, let's put this one more number to the thousands, what number would I put next? What would go here? 3. What about up here? If I were to go one more over, what would it go? 0, right? So that's the difference between a terminating and a repeating. Terminating, I would just keep putting zeros. The repeating, I would have to put whatever is underneath that line as my repeating. And it is extremely important. If you do not put that line over the 3, it gets counted wrong. Because if not, it tells me that stops. It stops after the 0.33 and stops. Right? Okay. So what that looks like as a percent is actually going to be 33 1/3%. And the reason why we can't just say it's 33%, because again, that says that it ends. And we have to be very, very precise, because percents have to be very, very precise. So to be precise, we have to put that 1/3 in there. It's really not hard. I just have to memorize that. All right, so let's talk about 1/4. Oh, let's shade this in. I almost forgot to shade it in. So we've got 1 out of 3. All right, so let's look at 1/4. 1/4. If I think about money, how much money is that? 1/4. Yes, sir.
25 cents.
25 cents. How would I write that? Go for it.
0.25.
0.25. All right. I can do that. All right. That's pretty easy. Now let's do the percent. What percent is 1/4? Yes, ma'am.
25%.
Perfect. 25%. So again, if I know what 1/4 is, I'll be able to find out infinite number of quarters, right? If I know what 1/4 is, can you tell me what 3/4 is? Yeah, without having to do all the division out. If I know what 1/4 is, a quarter plus a quarter plus a quarter is going to give me 3/4, 75 cents, or 75%, right? All right, let's shade that sucker in. All right. Are you noticing that when I had a half, when I colored it in, that 1/3 was less than a half, which was less than 1/4? You notice how it's going smaller? Okay, just a nice little visual there. All right, let's talk about 1/5. 1/5 is a really, really easy benchmark fraction, but it kind of gets overlooked sometimes because you get focused on half and third and fourth and you forget about the fifths. Fifths are really easy. So the fifth is going to be 20%. So if I know that 1/5 is 20%, if I know that 1/5 is 20%, how many are 3/5?
60.
Go for it. 60%, right? 20, 40, 60. Yeah? Right? What about 4/5? 80. 80%, right? You're like, I'm getting this whole, if I know what 1/5 is, I can find out what all the fifths are. So what is that going to look like as a decimal? What can you think? Yes, sir. Try. Don't just shake your head. Try. It's okay if you're wrong, but I want you to try. 0.20. Perfect. Perfect. See? You were doubting yourself, and you didn't need to doubt yourself. All right. So now we know what the fraction, percent, and decimal is for 1/5. Let's go ahead and shade in my 1/5 here. All right. Perfect. All right. Let's talk about 1/8. Now, 1/8 is a fraction that gets a really bad reputation. It's a bad reputation because it doesn't seem as easy as all these other ones, but it really is. Okay, so let's talk about 1/8 for a minute. So I'm going to tell you that 1/8 is half of a fourth. So let's look back at fourth. Let's look at just the percent right now. Let's focus on the percent. If 1/8 is half of a fourth, then the percent would be half of 25%, right? Which is what? 12.5%. All right, perfect. All right, okay, so I'm getting somewhere, right? What about that as a decimal? This one always throws people for a loop because you're like, writing it as a decimal. What do you think?
12.5.
All right, so that's a really, really common mistake. I'm glad you did that because I wanted to talk about that. Because you see, it already has a decimal in it, right? So your brain says, oh, well, that's got to be the decimal because it's already got a decimal in it. But let's think about it like this. 1/8, it's smaller than a quarter, correct? Yes? So if I have a quarter, a coin, a quarter sitting in my hand, 1/8 is half of that, yes? So I'd have to cut that quarter in half. If I were to write that as a decimal as 12.5, how much money would that be? If I were to write it, if I wrote 12.5 on the board, how much money would you assume I had?
That would be at least like $12.
Right. And remember, I only have a half of a quarter in my hand. Is that little half of a quarter worth $12.50? No, right? The reason why we can't just drop this percent is because that percent actually means out of 100. So let's think about my 0.25. What is half of 0.25? What do you think?
0.12 and a half.
Very good. 0.12 or 0.125. I know, but then you think to yourself, I'm not sure. All those other ones are only 2, and this one's 3. It's okay. It's okay. All right, let's shade that sucker in. And I'm going to just do 1 star because that's the one that I really probably need to focus on my when I'm memorizing these. So if I know what 1/8 is, right, we know that it's 12.5%. What would 3/8 be? If 1/8 is 12.5%, what would 3/8 be? How can I figure that out?
You do 12.
I do 12.5%. plus 12.5% plus 12.5% or times 3. And I'm going to get
36.5.
close.
37.5.
37.5%, right? All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, 1/10. That's easy. How do I write that as a percent? What is 1/10 as a percent? Yes, ma'am.
10%.
10%. What is that as a decimal? Yes, sir. 0.10. And then, of course, we're going to shade this in. And it's just slightly smaller than 1/8. And then the easy peasy one, what is 1 whole? What is that as a percent? 100%. Hopefully that's what everybody got on their test. Right? And then what is that going to look like as a decimal? 1. And I'm just going to, because we're talking about a decimal, I'm just going to put 1.00, just because. And then, of course, that would be the whole bar here shaded in, right? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So we have some nice visuals of how those fractions were getting smaller. All right, and then I added 2/3 on here. I added 2/3 because the thirds always throw everybody for a loop. So if you can memorize 1/3 and 2/3, that would be even better for you. So if 1/3 is 33.33%, what do you think 2 of those is going to be?
66 and 2/3.
Very good. 66 and 2/3%. Now, what would my repeating decimal look like? Ooh.
66.
AJ,
0.66.
just like that?
With the line of.
Very good. Because if I left it like that, would it be right?
No.
No, because I still have to put the repeating decimal on top of it, or the repeating sign on top of it. All right, so that's our benchmark fractions. That's it. Good to go. We're going to glue this into our journal.